Welcome to the Tech Perspective podcast presented by Flatiron School. It's a podcast where we show the diverse perspectives of folks in tech. And today we have a special guest joining us virtually, head of data science at Saturn Cloud, co-author of the book Build a Career in Data Science, and co-host of the Build a Career in Data Science podcast, Dr. Jacqueline Nolis. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. It's a pleasure. I actually think it's actually pretty appropriate that you're one of our first guests because just doing research on you, a lot of your work, a lot of your talks have to do with helping people that are aspiring to be in data science join the field. I'm curious, like, where did the desire to sort of help people join the data science space come from? Was it really influenced by your introduction into data science?
Yeah, so most of the desire to help has come from a career where every so often my career, something would finally click and be like, wait, that should have been obvious the whole time. And people should have told it to me. Why didn't no one tell it to me? And I'm like, I should tell other people this thing I learned. Like, for instance, like I have a whole talk about how do you handle failure in data science. And that is one where it's like, man, I wish someone had talked to me when I was, 2 years into my career, but like, no one had. And then I'm like, well, I should go do that for other people. So that has consistently been the motivation for almost everything I've kind of done, to like help people become data scientists and grow and stuff.
And in your background, you actually didn't like sought out to be a data scientist. At first, you wanted to be you thought about being a math teacher when you were getting your degree, right?
Yeah, well, okay. So I originally started in like my undergrad in college is like wanting to be an electrical engineer. And then I'm like, no, circuits, that's too much for me. I'm like, oh, I like math. And then I'm like, what do I want to be after, you get a math degree? Everyone's like, and this is in like 2000s, early 2000s. And so data science was the thing yet. So people like, oh, you're going to be a math teacher? You're going to be a math teacher? I'm like, well, I'll try and be a math professor. That sounds like mathy and research. And then I realized, actually, I don't like doing math research. Then I'm like, well, I hear people say that mathematicians can help businesses. I'm going to be a business mathematician, which we would now call a data scientist, but data scientists didn't exist then. But also it wasn't a field yet. So it really was just like I kind of fell into that idea of like, I don't use business to solve math, right? At the time where businesses are like, what if we use math to solve business? And we called it data science. And that kind of all just worked out for me.
That makes sense. I mean, it kind of makes sense for what we do today, right? Like you start something and then all of a sudden you end up pivoting just because of the times that you're kind of in, right?
Yeah. And I kind of, at some level, I feel a little disingenuous because there are a lot of people who are like seasoned data scientists who are giving all this advice to junior data scientists, but becoming a data scientist now is fairly different than becoming a data scientist when the field didn't exist yet. And someone's like, oh, you have a math degree, come on, join. So it's kind of different. So I've tried not to just go around telling people to do what I did, because I don't think like it's 15 years later or whatever, but I do think there's still like lots of good ways you can get into the field. You just have to it is a constantly evolving scenario.
Yeah. And that actually makes me think of like one of the most highly debated topics about getting into the field of data science, which is master's versus like a boot camp or PhD versus a boot camp. As someone who is, led teams, like is there a real distinction that you see in those two paths? And like, what do you look for nowadays when like the people's experience kind of runs the gamut? Like, what do you look for nowadays for someone joining your team?
So I actually think what I look for now isn't that different than what they looked for 15 years ago, which is what I look for when hiring a data scientist is, do you have on your resume something that I can point to and be like, oh, that is existing data science experience, right? Have you had a data science internship? Have you been to a data science bootcamp where you did a project just like you would do at a team I worked at? Do you have a message? Like, is there something I can point to and be like, okay, you probably are going to know what's going on when I hire you for this job? And so this idea of like boot camp versus masters, I think it really depends on the particular person. Like if you already have a master's in like geology and you already have a lot of like STEM experience, but it's in geology, then like maybe a boot camp is just enough you need. But if you don't have that, if you maybe then a master's is what's right for you. And maybe it's like you can learn it. Maybe you don't need either of those. And you can just kind of pick up data science on your job as an analyst or as a finance person. Like there's a lot of paths, and I don't think there's objectively right one or not. But the objective thing you need is the ability to like have someone look at your resume and be like, oh yeah, you seem like you probably have a concept of what goes on here.
Yeah, I try to stress that a lot when you get like, I think when students come here, or at least prospective students come, they kind of have this idea in their mind that a boot camp is like almost settling, right? And I think of a few students that actually came here that had a lot less background than, say, a master's. Like one student in particular, coming from like the music industry and then pivoting into data science. And of course, he gets into a role at a music company as a data scientist, right? Like it kind of just makes sense for whatever your background is, utilizing that in conjunction with data science, right?
Yeah, and I think the idea that a boot camp is settling, I would argue more that a master's is generally way over scoping, right? Like I have a doctorate. Do you know how many courses in my doctorate actually have anything to do with data, like actual day-to-day data science work? It's like basically one course I took kind of relates to this stuff. And a master's too, much of what you will learn is like very theoretical, or like hey, you need a compute a logistic regression by hand, and like stuff that isn't it's like and I mean it's good to like round you out as a scholar or something, but like it's not practical. And if it's like you're going to pay an extra 50 grand to know how to do a logistic regression by hand, like I don't know if that's a good deal. So I mean, I think there are times where it's better to go for a master's, and there's time when it's better to go for a boot camp, but the idea that one is like strictly better than the other, I have fault with. And I think there are a lot of people who are judgy on the internet about boot camps. I don't know. There are a lot of judgy people on the internet about everything. So just, I don't know. Don't let that get to you too hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and that's the other thing, right? It's like it's like this old guard of like this is the way things are, and this is the way they should be. So when you go to maybe like a boot camp or something like that, you're not looked at as like a real data scientist, or even just a data professional, even if you're starting out as an analyst.
Yeah. Okay. And this is like expands outside of data science. And I find it fascinating that there are people like, I remember there was like a New York Times article a few years back about how like some schools weren't teaching cursive anymore. And the comments threads on that article were filled with people like, how could you call yourself a true person if you don't know how to write cursive? Like I had to write cursive growing up. Why don't kids? And it's like, I think that exists in a lot of areas, including data science, where it's like, well, I had to do a logistic regression by hand, so kids should too. And it's like, I text now. I don't even handwrite stuff anymore, So like, I don't know. People weirdly associate their own nostalgia with what they think other people need to learn. And I just don't think that's generally true.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Like I walked this path in order to be as great or as successful as I did, do this exact same thing that I did.
Yeah, or just like a meaner version of that is like, well, I had to suffer, and if I had to suffer, you need to suffer too. So it makes my suffering justified, and that's how you should do a logistic regression by hand in a master's. Well, I don't know.
When you mentioned doing a linear regression by hand, it actually reminds me of the story that I always tell at my events. Is that when I was in college, I went to college and studied business, but I had saw coding and was like, oh, let me try that, and I did C++ and advanced C++. And I'll never forget this. My final paper, my final exam was on paper. Like we had to write out the code, and like halfway through the final, I'm like, wait a minute, like this is computer programming and I'm writing it down. Like this is insane.
Yeah, and like that logistic regression story is real. It happened to someone I know. I also know someone who got into a PhD program. They had to learn Fortran because that's what their advisors used for the last 20 years, right? Like academia is generally not a place where people embrace the cutting edge of a lot of technologies, and like, which is fine, but it's just, I don't know. I have a lot of pent up resentment towards academia having gone through a PhD program, and it comes out sometimes.
Well, this is certainly the platform to do it. I wanted to ask you about your time as a consultant, in terms of like, since we're speaking about sort of like non-traditional pathways in this space, like what do you remember most fondly about your time as a consultant, and what do you remember as like, I never want to have to deal with this again as a consultant?
Okay. let me give the so let me just briefly talk. So I did my undergrad and master's. I worked for a few years. When I got a PhD, during my PhD, I started consulting on the side with a consulting company, like contracted me. And then I switched to consulting for like 6 years after that. And like data science consulting. And I think the thing I liked most is it's really fun if you have like a company that doesn't have that much data science expertise to be able to walk in and be like, let me help you with data science. And then you do help them, right? Like if they're like, hey, look, I built a churn model that can predict when your customers are going to leave so you can blah, blah, blah. Like that's really cool and fun. The least enjoyable part about that is when they hire you to come in and say something smart and clever. And then it turns out like their data was too noisy and like your models don't work. And you're like, data science can solve your problem. And then they pay you a lot of money. And at the end, you're like, actually, it didn't. And like, that's just how consulting works. Cause like, you don't know how your projects are going to go, but like the feeling of joy when your ideas that data and mathematics will help people out. And then it does, really big high. And when it turns out on occasion, when it like doesn't work and your ideas of like, we can solve this with data science, like that is a rough time, I would say. That took a while to learn how to deal with.
Did you feel like at any point as a consultant, I know you did it with a consulting firm and independently, did you at any point feel like you were growing professionally as a data professional, but also just feeling kind of exhausted by the sort of like the sales pitchy side of the networking and acquiring business side of things?
Yeah, I would say that I think I underestimate it, and I think other people underestimate who consider being a consultant, just how much of the job is trying to figure out what your next consulting contract is going to be. And I think it's very easy when you're like working at a full-time data science job to sit back and be like, what if were my own boss and set my own hours and got to be a freelance consultant? And I think the reality of it is like when you're working as a freelance consultant, you're like, oh my God, how am I going to make money next month? Like, who do I know who needs data science help? And it's like so much of how good you are as a consultant entirely ends up coming down to strictly the number of people you know who might happen to want data science help. And so I worked for a consultant as a consultant for other companies for many years. So I made lots of networking and things like that. And I still struggle to consistently have work like with new customers coming in. And so I think if you don't have years of consulting behind you, it can really be quite tricky to do the marketing and all that stuff to try and get the leads in the first place. So that was really, I think, tricky and stressful. And I do think that was that was also, besides not actually being able to help people with data on occasion, also the work of maintaining the consulting firm and getting the contracts and dealing with taxes. And some companies don't pay you until 4 months after you've done the work. Like that all stuff was very challenging too. So I don't super recommend, I don't recommend being a freelance consultant very easily. I think working at a consulting firm mitigates a lot of that risk. And like, you don't make as much money as working entirely on your own, but you also don't have to worry about, oh God, I didn't get any new contracts this week. So yeah.
Right. That's a careful balance that you have to kind of walk, right? Like you want to be your own boss, but you assume so much of the risk when you do, right?
Exactly. Which like can financially be lucrative if you are your own boss. You get your boss's paycheck, but also can be terrifying. So
Right. And did you feel like you were growing as a data practitioner? Did you feel like your skills were growing in that space at the same time while you were kind of stressing about those details?
yes and no. I think my skills as a salesperson and a contract writer and all that stuff, I think that growth. And that actually, I think is helpful as a data scientist because a lot of working with stakeholders is about managing relationships and networking and stuff. So I think that helped. I don't think I got better at like neural networks or like blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't think I got better at technical skills necessarily faster than I would have if I had a full-time job. The benefit is potentially because you are consulting with lots of companies and things like that, you are constantly being faced with new problems and you got to find out new solutions for us and things like that. But the downside is because your contracts are short, you may not get to like do the full implementation and like develop the full product. So I think I think consulting is a really good way to learn how companies work really quickly and like get a lot of them. But if you're like, I really want to become like the most seasoned expert in like, neural networks and logistics, like the technical side, I'm not sure consulting is faster than having a full-time job.
Got you. Got you. Yeah, that makes sense because I mean, you're kind of you don't have the long runway. You don't get to sort of build rapport and really understand deeply the business side of things for a particular company and allow you to sort of like progress there.
Right. Or like, like maybe you wrote the initial model, but you didn't put it into an API and write the unit tests. And it's 3 a.m. and it broke. And now how do you fix it in that situation? And like, it needs to garbage collect faster. Like there's a lot of things that if you maintain the whole pipeline, you get to see that you wouldn't see if you just do the initial like proof of concept model building and then hand it off to the internal team to build. I mean, that said, I think there are times where your industry job has you doing the same work over and over again, so you don't learn much. And there are times where your consulting company takes the exact same style of project 5 times in a row, so you don't get that much there. But it's like, so it really depends on the particular job at the particular time, rather than consulting. I think you strictly learn data science faster than you would at a industry job.
Got you. You touched on something that I try to preach to data science prospective students when they come here. Because a lot of them are like really engulfed in like the technical side of things. They're like, maybe I know a lot of math, but I don't know any coding. I don't know Python. I don't know R. And then you get the reverse. I've done some software engineering or some coding in Python, but I really don't understand the statistics side of things. The part that I try to stress to students, because it's so integral to their actual job after they leave the program, is the business side of things, is understanding deeply the business ask and the business problem. Is that something that you, and as the lead of a team, is that something that you find, like even with professionals, people that have been working in the industry for a while, like something that you constantly have to go back to with them?
Okay, no, because I think by the time you start working a job, you realize the perspective you are giving is correct, which is, hey, this stuff really matters and is really important. I think before you get to the job in the first place, it's very easy to look at the technical things and be like, oh my God, I need all these technical things. But like, you can learn technical things on the job. Whereas I think the non-technical, the like, how do I communicate well? If my stakeholder's being fussy, when should I bring that to my manager? Like those sorts of things. There's not like, oh, just take this test and study and you will learn it. It's very much like you have to just practice those skills to get better at them, right? Like, yeah, it's really about practice and that sort of thing, which is both, it's harder when you're in like a boot camp to like even like internal, like conceptualize that, because it's kind of like a thing you don't really know what it looks like till you get on a job. And also, even if you could conceptualize exactly what you look like, you can't like, again, you can't like study during your boot camp for it. You kind of just have to like do it. So I do think that it is the case that once you get like actually into your first job and things like that, you realize, oh, hey, this human stuff is really important. And knowing the exact optimal technique to use in every situation isn't as important. And especially, I will say on that part, I do think that especially like students and stuff, they have this idea of like, use a logistic regression in this one and use this and this. And like, you got to like map the business problem to the exact optimal method. And like, this one, and like, but in practice, it's like, the problems you deal with are like, oh, half the data is missing and it only updates once a week and blah, 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 to the point where like, it doesn't matter what model you pick. If any model works, you're already in pretty good shape. So like this idea of like getting to be an expert in just the model-y part is much less important than trying to understand how to handle the whole picture at once.
Yeah, exactly. Completely understand and completely. That's something that I try to stress to students all the time. But sometimes you gotta feel through the fire,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I said, it's hard to really get it until you're on there. And like, I can tell a story about this. So I remember a month into my first job, I was working on like a new model that I could really help things. And like, I presented it to like a group of like directors. And I think there was like a vice president in the meeting. And one of them said like, oh, hey, can we add this sort of like a thing to it? And I said, yeah, sure. And they said, well, how long would that take? And I just looked at them and I'm like, well, a half hour. And everyone in the meeting stared at me. And it turns out in business meetings, when someone asks you how long it takes, you don't say an hour, you say like 3 days, because, even if it takes 30 minutes to write that
Right.
code. You want to check it, blah, blah, blah. You need to go grab your coffee. And like these things are always sandbag. And it looks weird if you're like, oh, that change, that major change you can make only takes 30 minutes. And like, that is a norm we all know, but I didn't know until I had that awkward meeting. And I think a data science career is just a whole sequence of those until eventually you're like, okay, I kind of get it now.
That makes so those kind of soft skills that you can't learn unless you're in the space.
Yeah, and how would I have known, right? Like,
Right.
I didn't know. It would have taken me 30 minutes to write it. And like, I didn't factor in any like testing and stuff. But, like, who cares? Like, I'm sure it'll probably work, which turns out was not, like testing and stuff matters. But I was a month into my first job. I didn't know that.
Yeah. You gave an honest answer. You were you asked a question and you gave an honest answer. That's what happened.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things like that. And you just got to figure them out.
You mentioned earlier about like you in your consulting days, you had some stints where it didn't work out, right? And I saw you gave this really great talk on failure. One, I would love for you to kind of describe sort of your relationship to failure, and if you could identify, if you have one, a favorite failure.
Favorite failure. Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, that was one of my favorite talks I give. And here's the gist of it, especially in that first job I had fresh out of my master's at that point. I had this notion that data scientists, they don't fail at stuff, right? Like if someone asks you to make a model, you'll make a model and it will probably work. And if it doesn't work, a better data scientist could have gotten it to work. So it's kind of your responsibility to make things work, which is, I think, maybe true in some fields where like, if you can't do it, someone better maybe could have. And so I had this really high pressure on myself that when I built stuff, it worked. And when I told people, hey, yeah, we can use data to do this thing, it actually did that thing. So like, for example, if I had a model, and I said, hey, we can detect if there's something wrong with the website because sales are too low using my model. If I say we can do something like that, in theory, and then I go and build the model, I should be able to do that. That was my idea. It turns out after a career of working on this, that when you have an idea of like, let's use data to detect if there's a problem or blah, 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 let's build a churn, like 80%, 75% of the time you say that, it's not going to actually work. Right? For a million reasons, right? Maybe the data isn't good enough. Maybe the data is good enough, but there isn't actually a signal in the data, right? So you're like, I'm going to use email data to predict if a customer is going to stop subscribing. Like maybe the email data just doesn't tell you if a customer is going to subscribe or not.
Right.
So there's like a million reasons, and like it's totally fine that you have an idea and then you try and it doesn't work. Like these sorts of failures are kind of a normal thing. And when I realized that, I stopped beating myself up so much, because instead of taking each failure as oh God, I'm not a very good data scientist, I instead turned them into the more positive attitude of, hey, I had a new idea. I tried the new idea and it turns out for reasons I couldn't have predicted, the new idea didn't work. That is fine. I will take what I learned from it and move on. I think my favorite example of a failure that I have was I was consulting for like marketing, like retail companies. And when you're a retail company, you want to run like coupons, like you want to put out a coupon campaign and you want to know, well, how much will giving out these coupons increase or decrease increase my revenue? Like, will it pay off all the cost of making the coupons in the first place? And so typically what companies used to do is they would make an Excel spreadsheet that would be like, if we give out 50,000 coupons and 10% of people open them and we think blah, 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 then you do that arithmetic and that's how much the coupon's value is going to bring. And I'm like, well, what if we use machine learning and we do agent-based simulation where we take each customer in your database and we say, well, if they got a coupon, what's the chance they will take that coupon and actually use it to blah, 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 and they buy a whole new shirt. And so I built out this really elaborate thing. And it turns out that the model, it seemed to give much more precise, accurate predictions of how much each coupon was worth, which feels like it should have been a success. Except what happened was after we ran this model, the companies would be like, hey, this is all cool, but like, we don't understand the super complex machine learning thing. Can you just make an Excel spreadsheet that tells us the results? And my failure was I thought that what companies want was the most accurate result, but it was not what they wanted. What companies really wanted was an Excel spreadsheet they could show to finance to say, hey, look, our coupon isn't going to break the company. And so here, my failure was trying to predict what the customers actually wanted, which was most accurate models, when in fact, what they just wanted is a different department to sign off. So sometimes the model failure isn't even in the actual model itself. It is what you're trying to do with it. And like failures like this can show up all the time in data science. So
Wow. Wow. So that was that, do you think like maybe that could have been a breakdown in communication from the stakeholder? Like, do you think like in those scenarios, all right, were you supposed to anticipate that, or were they supposed to be much more forthcoming with their agenda?
if I was a stakeholder and a consulting company came to me and said, "Hey, we are going to make your financial models more accurate," I would say, "Cool." And then it said, "Here's a more accurate model." I wouldn't say, "But keep it in Excel," because really, I just want to like decide. Like, I think I'm supposed to want to have more accurate finance when I actually don't care about the finance so long as the finance team signs off on it. So I think there's like a misplay between what people will tell you and what their true motives are, which is probably true in many, if not most times you have to deal with stakeholders. But like, I don't know. I maybe could have predicted. But then also it's like it was a failure, but my consulting company did make some money selling this. So is it like, was it truly a failure for me personally if my company did make a few bucks on it? But then I had to face the clients who are like doing Excel anyway. So I don't know, like it's all shades of gray.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so funny. You mentioned like what people want versus what they want versus what they say they want.
Yeah.
That actually brings me to the idea of like job requirements. So I think one of the reasons why students are kind of hung up on a master's degree is because of the requirements of like some of these companies out here, and they get hung up on the technical side of things because like most of these companies in the job descriptions are asking for the farm, right? For maybe a student that's just entering the job market, maybe just finished a boot camp or finished a master's program, what have you, do you have any advice for them as they're looking at these like very aggressive job descriptions, when sometimes the company isn't even sure if what they're asking for is actually what they want?
I would say most of the time it is not what they
Yeah.
actually want. Because I mean, yeah, well, first off, the people who write the job post and the people who do the hiring, depending on the size of the company, they might not even be the same people. So like the person who writes the job post may not actually be the person who makes the phone calls and like interviews and stuff.
Right.
But even assuming they were, I think when a person writes a job post, they're usually like, I want someone who's a beginner at data science, but I can get them up to speed pretty quickly. Or, hey, I want someone who I can trust knows what they're like they can do, especially maybe some of the trickier algorithms. Like I can trust that they know what they're doing. And in those middle one, like that one, they may actually require a master's, and that's not truly if you do not have a master's, you will not be capable of doing this job. But it's like a proxy for like, come on, like you should know what you're doing. And then also there are jobs that require PhDs, and like almost basically no data job actually requires a PhD, because like a PhD is about doing academic research, and data science jobs are not academic research. So when someone puts a PhD requirement on the job posting, it really means I don't know what I'm looking for, but I want that person to really be an expert, which is not what a PhD means. So like that's a red flag, like that's a bad sign. So the point of all of this is the goal. I mean, it's good to, as much as possible, try and point out how you meet the requirements of the job post, but I wouldn't take them all as a grain of salt. And if a company requires a master's, but you don't have a master's, but you think you'd be phenomenal for it and you have experience you can point to, it is possible you will still get a phone call from that anyway, depending on who's like doing the filtering and stuff. So I would try and try and think about what they are asking for, like between the lines, rather than exactly, well, I don't have a master's, therefore I should not apply for this job.
Yeah, agree completely. You got to read between the lines with some of these job requirements, because I mean the way that they pick resumes now, right? They're looking for buzzwords in the resumes, like going through these automatic filters, and it's really impersonal in some ways. So if you can, I guess, figure out a way to incorporate those buzzwords into your resume, I guess maybe you might get a call back, right?
Yeah, and also it is currently, as we're recording, like late 2021, and right now the job market is extremely hot for candidates. So it might be a scenario where in other times they would have been super picky. Now they'll be like, well, we'll give you a call where they otherwise might not would have. But I do think what you said about like using the words from their job posting in your resume so their automatic computer machine picks it up is like, yeah, that stuff can help. So like, yeah, maybe do it if you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read this thing a few days ago about, since you mentioned about like PhD versus like masters, like it was saying like the PhD folks really focus heavily on research, and then the other, on the other end of that spectrum is like actionable data professionals. So is a research section, then you have like actionable data professionals. So like understanding like which one of those buckets you fall into is really important.
Well, and there's probably one research job for every 100 these, whatever you call it, professional, like working professional job. And those research jobs are basically like being back in academia, or like being in academia with a PhD. So like, if you're like, man, I really want to do academic research, then I would encourage you to get a PhD and like not consider data science as a like profession, consider it as an avenue for academic research, which is fine. It's not what I'm into, but that's fine. And in which case, the jobs that do require PhDs, that like Microsoft Research or things like that, then those are more like they make more sense. But also those jobs are very competitive for people with PhDs and publications. So like that's a whole like that's kind of a little bit like, I want to grow up and be a rock star, which is like, maybe you can be a rock star, but it's very tricky, and that's not easy to come by job.
Right. As someone who is very established in this space, obviously a thought leader in helping people build a career in data science, I'm sure you get a lot of questions, probably a lot of repeat questions. So I know I'm not even a thought leader in this space, and I get a lot of repeat questions from folks aspiring to break into this particular space. What question do you get from aspiring data scientists that you are wish you didn't get? And what question do you get that you wish more aspiring data science actually asked?
So at some level, I do get people who ask me, hey, how do I get a job in data science? And I do not, they're like, what do I need to do to get a job in data science? Like, here's where I'm at right now. And like, I'm happy to workshop that with people a bit, but I struggle with this for two reasons. One, everything I've written on, every thought I've ever had on this topic, I've written into a book with Emily Robinson. So at some level, I'm like, I wrote a whole book on that. Like, I would recommend reading that book. But that's like the kind of glib answer. But at like a more deep thing, it's like, I think sometimes when people ask this question, what they really want are like cheat codes of like, hey, what are the 3 secret words I put on my resume? And then I get the data science job. And I don't think there are cheat codes here. I do think it's a lot of like, do projects which take a lot of work that show you're capable of doing data science, and like try and find an internship. And but like there's lots of things that take lots of work. And sometimes I think people want to hear like, I don't like, how do I do that but without the work? And like I don't have a good answer to that. And so I think that I struggle with sometimes, where I'm like, I don't know, just do the hard things that take a lot of work. That's the best I can tell you. I'm sorry. And
do people think you're like holding out secrets that you haven't said in like the last 100 workshops that you've done on this?
I don't think they think I specifically, like Jacqueline Nolis, are like a nefarious person like that. But I do think at some level, like if you ever look at Q&A sessions with anyone famous or anything like that, they're like, what's the secret to success, right? Like there's always this notion that people who have done the thing you want to do have some hidden knowledge that if you had that knowledge, it'd be easy. But it's not usually like, oh, it's 3 small facts. It's like, usually it's like they have a wealth of experience and backing, like they walk down a hard journey to get to where they are. And like, the only advice they can really give is you can also try walking down hard journeys, Yeah. Which is very unfulfilling advice. Like it's unfortunate when someone comes to me like, what are the 3 secrets I need to be a good data scientist? And it's like, do hard, like it's not satisfying for them or me, but I do think it is the truth of like, yeah, this is kind of hard. Like even in 2021, it's still quite a competitive field. And so it is just like, you have to really put work in to get this job compared to other ones.
Yeah, agreed. And the back half of that question, like, what do you wish more people entering this field, what question do you say like, God, I wish they would ask this question more, because it's far more supportive to actually what they want to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's fair, which is, I think there is a certain amount of like, if and only if you are you have the job title of data science, will you be doing interesting data science work? But I think I wish people would like ask more and think more about like, what are the interesting data science things you can do while not having the title of data science, like within the role of analyst or other things. Or similarly, like how do you avoid scenarios where you are a data scientist with a data science role and you're like, this job is unfulfilling, right? It's a very light correlation between interesting data science work and your job title is considered a data scientist. So I think kind of like, hey, how do I navigate that a little bit more versus I just want the job title data scientist because then I will be a data scientist and this will all be over. Like, I think that kind of exploration, I would encourage people to think about that because I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
Oh, that's such a great point, because we just we just did a study of like the last, I think it's maybe about the last year of job titles people have gotten leaving the data science program here. And it's like over 50. It's so many different job titles. And if you look at the requirements, like some people that are in like a traditional, or the title might say like data analyst, business analyst, or something like that. A lot of their functions actually are data science functions, right? And it's interesting that people are like really gravitating towards this title without really conceptualizing like what the day-to-day work actually is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so I will say I've been doing data science work for like 15 years. However, and like this is a somewhat different scenario, but like, however, I've only actually had the title data scientist for like 3 of those years. And of 3 of those years, like 2 of them, I personally made my own job title. So like the idea that, I don't know. And again, some of these were older before data science was like a full term. So like there's not like, that's kind of hiding some stuff, but like there is lots of things you can do that are interesting without technically having the title data scientist. So
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
don't let that be, I think people let that be the like measure of success of, is your job title called data scientist? And I do not think that should be the measure of success.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
I pulled up my resume to confirm this is true while we were talking. That's why I was like,
oh, really?
yeah. Yes.
So when you were a consultant, your title wasn't data science. You were like a data consultant.
I was principal data scientist because I made it up myself when I was, but when I was working at other firms, we were analytics at that point. And like now, would we have rebranded to data science in 2021 if I was still at that firm? Maybe, but like it still was data science work and we called it analytics and that was all fine. And like, yeah, I don't know. Companies are pretty loose with what they call things. And sometimes they hire people to do one thing and they end up doing another. And like, that's just kind of how it goes. So
yeah, it's like that thing at the bottom of each resume, like responsibilities may include other duties as assigned. Like
that's right.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about too, which I thought was super interesting, is your affinity for art. I really like that last one that you did with the Excel, like was on the.
I have it. 1 second. Let me.
Yeah, let's see it. Yes, that's the one.
Guess I don't know if you're actually sharing this in a video or just doing a podcast, but like here is the art. This is a print because the original was auctioned off for charity. But yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's super dope. I wanted to ask, like, is there like a sort of through line between art and data science that maybe like the uninitiated may not see just on a surface level?
I think there's like, okay, so I think some people would answer this with like, mathematics is art and like really dramatic. I don't think I believe that. What I think is actually kind of nice, so I picked this up as a quarantine hobby, which has been fun. But what's been kind of nice is I find with data science, it's very like, you got to stop and think. You got to stop and think. You got to stop. Like, you're working on an analysis. Like, are these the right features? I got to stop and I got to think. And like, there's like this kind of on, off. When I'm doing art, I don't have to really do that. I can just kind of like, there is some of this like, well, how am I going to place this? Like, how am I going to place this river in this picture or whatever? But it's much more like I can try to just zone out and do it compared to data science, which I find very relaxing. So it's like, I still got to feel like I'm accomplishing something and things like that, but I don't have to have this like real, like, is this even gonna work that I get with like data science? Because like, I don't know, I spend 2 hours painting something and if it doesn't work, that's fine. And then I move on. Like, it's like a different mental space. And I find that really helpful for doing data science. There was back when I was writing that book with Emily Robinson on data science, or like when I was doing consulting and I have to do consult data science in the evenings and stuff. It's very hard because you're constantly in the exact same mind space and you're constantly trying to do stuff. And for me, having an outlet that was unrelated to mathematics and data science and just artistic and interesting, I find that very rewarding. And I do think it's one of these things where like the more well-rounded you are as a person, the better at all your things. Like you don't over optimize one skill. So I've really enjoyed it, but I would not say that like I've learned the true beauty of data science through my art. Like I would not say anything like that. Like it's just paint.
It's just it's just paint. Don't look any deeper into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I when I first saw it, I thought like maybe there was like something about the positioning of like
the spirals.
Yeah, just something. I thought it was gonna be something super meta. And then,
no, but like doing a lot of art got me in the mindset that I then made a R package, like in the programming language R, for taking your R plots and turning them into postcards and art prints and paint. Like, and so like, I don't know, like thinking about one thing gave me an idea to do something else. And that's why like, I think being a well-rounded individual is good for being a data scientist, because you've got to think about stuff in different ways. But yeah, like I think that's kind of the true level of depth, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with your point about like being super well-rounded, because like folks sort of coming into, that's why I kind of like the career change space, because folks come in with these really eclectic backgrounds, come in, learn a skill, and I think it only lends itself to growing an organization like from an ideas perspective, but also just culturally, right? Just creating a nice company, a well-rounded company culture where folks can probably build relationships outside of just the profession in which you work.
Yes, I think that's true. I've worked with a fair number of people who had backgrounds that actually like, I know someone who was doing oil and gas first and then became a data scientist, someone who's doing fisheries, actually multiple fishery people, just like fisheries a thing. And like, it's good. It just like having different backgrounds give you different perspectives. Situations where everyone's had the same background, I've struggled with a lot more than situations where everyone's had different backgrounds. So yeah, totally think that.
Absolutely. As we kind of get to closing here, I wanted to ask, this is a question, this is our first episode. So
wait, really? I didn't know that. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. And I'm excited to have you on, because I just think like, one, just going through a lot of your talks, I thought like some of the work that you're doing in sort of like demystifying data science, especially the one you did on, it was creating like pet names. Yeah, the pet name, using neural networks. Like that one I thought was really great, because you really like broke it down into really a digestible way for even just a layman, even someone who's not interested in data science can understand it. And I think that was my role for a lot of my time here at Flatiron School. So yeah, it kind of made sense for you to be our first guest.
Yeah, so that's a funny project, because that is like, in that talk about using neural networks to generate pet names, like that is somewhat of a cover. The true way, so the story was, I never used to do any NLP. I never understood neural networks. Like I always want to learn that stuff, but like you have to install CUDA drivers, whatever. I don't know, I was intimidated by it. And then finally, like our studio released the Keras package for R, which made it easy to do neural network stuff in R, which is the language I prefer to use. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm going to try, you see all these things on the internet, Botanic Studios, especially L. O'Brien too. They do like, we used trained a neural net to make these funny band names or whatever. And I'm like, I want to make one of those. I want to be funny on the internet. And I remembered they had a data set that I've been thinking about for years of just the state of Arizona. They keep a public list of, or they keep a list of what are the license plate names people submitted. And the state's like, that's too offensive. Like that has a swear word in it. We can't let you put that on a car. So the DMV keeps a list of this. And so I emailed them doing a Freedom of Information request to get that list. And then I used that to train a neural network. And that is how I learned neural networks and natural language processing, which I then went and got like big consulting contracts doing that at companies. But it all started with my desire to train a neural network to generate offensive license plate names. And the funniest thing about this is I had this idea for a project. I was just starting on it and like, I couldn't get it to work. Like, I don't know, I was having some weird bug. And I was at a conference, and I think this is actually the first conference I ever presented at. And I was at this conference and I was talking to a person whose like whole thing was like NLP and like NLP and like grammar, I don't know, some expert in this field. And I was explaining this project to them and I'm like, but I can't get it to work. And the guy gave me this really disgusted look of like, you're using NLP for that. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm just trying. And then later, like, eventually I got it to work and it was great. And I got all these contracts, but like, don't let experts get you down if you have a funny idea for a project is maybe the lesson here. Because yeah, that stupid offensive license plate thing, which I then rebranded as pet names so I can use in more publicly facing ways. Although I do also have the pet names as a talk as well. The license plate offensive one as a talk as well. That ended up becoming the thing that became a cornerstone of my career. And I learned a bunch of stuff, blah, 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 blah. So like these side projects and things you learn to be a data science, they can come from anywhere. And like, don't let people with more experience get you down.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Cause like some of our projects are like really like out there and goofy and stuff like that. But like we encourage people to do that because you want to do something that you actually are super passionate about and you think it's funny, you think it's interesting, whatever, just go for it, right?
Yeah. And because I was so motivated to this offensive license plate thing, I put in the effort to learn neural networks. And then it turns out I really don't think they're as complicated as people make them out to be, which is what the talk you reference is about. Like, I don't think neural networks, especially in R with Keras, like that stuff's not bad at all. But I just needed the motivation to learn in the first place, which in this case was offensive license plates. Nice. And if you listeners are interested in doing that, I made the data set available, I think, on my GitHub page. So feel free to try training your own offensive license plate and generating neural network too.
Yes, nice. That would be great. We just have a bunch of projects out here, just a bunch of offensive license plate. Oh man. One of the things you speak about in the book is how to leave your first data science job, which I think is super interesting because I think like when I go to like Barnes and Noble or something, or you like just skimming through Amazon for books, there would be like a whole book for like how to leave a job. But this is like specific to data science, to a data science role. Just could you give a couple tips on like, what do you say to folks who are interested in, maybe they kind of peaked at a role and they're like, all right, I need to kind of move on from this?
Yeah, I think I will say I personally, of the things covered in the book, this is the thing that is most advice just to myself because I struggle with this, which is to say I'm very bad at believing when it's the right time to leave. Like there are times where I'm like, I want to leave, but I haven't even been at this job for a year. Is that right? Whatever. Am I being too fussy or blah? I struggle with this a lot. And I think a thing that I've had to learn is that there isn't a right answer to the question of, should I be leaving this company at this point? Which is to say, for some people, it might be the right point. For some people, it might not. You'll never know. Like, there's no way to ever know, hey, if you stay, would it be better for you stay or for you to leave? Because there's no like parallel dimension you can experiment and test both at once. And so whatever you choose to leave or stay, it is some sort of a leap of faith. And like, just there's no right answer. That being said, data science is a very fast moving field. People generally don't stay at jobs, for that long compared to other fields. And so there's much less of a penalty. People are like, if I leave a job too fast, then no one will hire me. And like, I think that penalty is less than people expect. In particular, if you're like, let's say you're at a company for less than a year and you're like, I don't know, this is whatever reason isn't working for me. If you can interview, and if you don't get interviews, then maybe that is a sign that like, okay, you haven't been at the company long enough. But also if you get interviews and you get a job, then it has already fixed your own problem, right? If it's like, right, no one will hire me if I only was at a job for 7 months. Well, if someone else just immediately hires you, it'll be fine. And I think that, so I think not just like rage quitting your job in a day, although I have done that on occasion. Don't like try and avoid that, but just like be strategic and kind of don't question yourself too much. Just kind of accept in your heart, you are who you are, and you are just going to make whatever decisions are best for you.
Absolutely. Cool. I mean, we're at the end. Jacqueline, thank you so much. I'm going to try to end every podcast with this. What is a quote that you lived by?
Oh, that's tough. I'm really bad at that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, let me think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, here's my answer.
Let's go.
Here's my
All right,
quote.
I'm ready.
I really like that metaphor of like, and you could probably tell this from the content of this whole podcast episode, but I really like that metaphor of like a ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are made for. Like, come on, yeah, you could have a whole data science career where every one of your projects succeeds and you take no risks, but like, come on, try some risky ideas. Maybe some of them will really pay off. Or like, hey, maybe you don't like that job, but you're in and you could keep staying, but like, try it. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's so much better things you can do by taking risks and trying than by staying where you are, like staying in like whatever situation that's risk-free. And I am giving this advice. I like this quote because I'm always not the best myself at taking this advice, but that is trying to be like the goal I strive for, I would say.
I love that. Can you give me that quote one more time?
Oh my goodness. I know I'm not getting the wording exactly right, but it's something like, a ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are made for. I think is the quote. So I don't know who said it. That's like you can Google it later. I guess I can Google later. Someone can.
If it's not the exact wording, then it's your quote now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Jacqueline, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. You made the first episode so great. Really appreciate it. Where can people find the book, Building a Data Science Career?
Build a career. Yes, build a career. You can get this book at bestbook.cool. So it's at bestbook.cool. And then if you use the offer code BuildBook40%, so that's 40% sign, BuildBook40%, you can get 40% off the book as well. So that's a pretty good deal.
Nice. And if folks want to connect with you, what's the best place to reach?
So if you want to like watch all my talks and stuff, you can go to jnolis.com. And if you want to connect with me personally or see my daily ramblings, I would check out my Twitter account, which is at SkyTetra, SKYETETRA, or just search Jacqueline Nolis. I'm the only Jacqueline Nolis on Twitter. Either way, that's where you can find me.
Highly recommend those talks. A lot of great content in there. Jacqueline, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.